Imagine yourself standing inside a villa just beyond the outskirts of Rome. The year is 73 after Christ. You are 15 years old. Yesterday, you met a man for the first time in your life. Today, you married him. He is a centurion, a career soldier, a man twice your age, hardened by discipline and violence. Your father arranged a match. There were negotiations, agreements, advantages weighed carefully. What there was not was your consent. No one asked if you wanted this. No one cared. The ceremony followed tradition perfectly. The sacrifice, the vows, the formal procession through the streets. Neighbors and relatives smiled. Guests praised your father for securing such a strong alliance. Men slapped your new husband on the back, laughing, congratulated him on his good fortune. They joked openly about the night ahead. No one asked how you felt. Now the feast has ended. Wine cups are empty. Voices are loud, sloppy, unrestrained. The room smells of sweat, smoke, and spilled drink. Your husband reaches for your hand. His grip is firm, possessive. There is no tenderness in it. He pulls you away from the crowd. You walk beside him toward his quarters. Your heart is pounding so hard it hurts. Your stomach feels hollow, tight with fear. You are terrified, but you repeat what every Roman girl has been taught since childhood. It will be over quickly. That is what they always say. You reach the door. He opens it. You step inside, and you see them. 5 men sit on benches along the wall. They are drinking wine, smiling, watching you. They do not rise. They do not leave. They do not look embarrassed. This is the moment most people never imagine when they think about Roman marriage. The wedding night was not private. It was not gentle, and it was not about intimacy. It was a public act, a political ritual, a demonstration of power meant to establish ownership, dominance, and control. This was not a hidden perversion or an unusual cruelty. It was standard practice, embedded in custom, defended by law, described casually by Roman poets and historians who saw nothing shameful in it. To understand Rome, you have to understand what happens in this room. Let me show you exactly how it worked. If you believe the darkest systems of power in history deserve to be remembered, consider following our work at Sinister Empires. We uncover stories buried beneath centuries of silence. The ritual had a name. Romans called it deductio in domo meriti, the leading of the bride into the husband's house. It sounds ceremonial, even harmless. It was anything but. After the formal wedding, the bride was escorted through the streets in a loud procession. Family members, friends, neighbors, and witnesses surrounded her. If the groom was a soldier, especially a centurion, the procession became deliberately crude. Men shouted sexual jokes. Obscene songs were sung. Comments were thrown at the groom, praising his strength, teasing him about what he was about to do. The bride's fear was not ignored. It was expected, even required. You were supposed to cry. If you didn't, people noticed. A bride who did not weep raised suspicion. Dry eyes suggested experience. Experience suggested impurity. And impurity reflected badly on her family. So you cried not only because you were afraid, but because fear itself was part of performance. Your tears prove your virtue. The procession ended at the house. You were led inside. At that moment, you might have believed the crowd would disperse, that the witnesses had fulfilled their role. They hadn't. In military marriages, especially among centurions and lower-ranking officers, the custom was explicit. The groom's comrades followed him into the bedchamber, not outside the door, not waiting in the hall, inside the room. They sat down, they drank, they stayed. Roman writers described this openly. Catullus, writing in the 1st century before Christ, refers to wedding night witnesses as though his audience already understands the practice. He treats it as normal, expected. Martial, writing in the 1st century after Christ, makes jokes about it in his epigrams. He assumes his readers will laugh because they know exactly what he's talking about. Plutarch, when discussing Roman customs, notes that military marriages often included fraternal witnesses to ensure the union was properly consummated. properly consummated. Those words matter. These men were not passive observers. They were there to verify, to judge, to confirm that the bride performed as expected. Now imagine this from her perspective. You are 15 years old. You have never experienced anything like this. You do not understand what is about to happen. And 5 grown men are watching you. Men who serve beside your husband. Men bound to him by loyalty, rank, and shared violence. Men who see you as property transferred from one household to another. You cannot refuse. You cannot ask them to leave. Your husband invited them. Tradition demands it. To object would insult his honor, and his honor matters more than your body. So it happens in front of them. They watch. They comment. They laugh. Roman wedding poetry includes lines where witnesses joke during consummation. They mock the bride's reactions. They encourage the groom. They turn her terror into entertainment. Your trauma becomes their bonding ritual. So, why would a society normalize this? Here is the part that should truly unsettle you about Roman culture. Everything existed to serve the state. Every ritual, every law, every custom. Marriage was not about love. It was about producing legitimate children. Children who would become citizens. Citizens who would serve the empire. The wedding night ritual served several purposes at once. First, it verified virginity. Crying, struggling, bleeding, all of it was taken as evidence. If those signs were absent, suspicion followed. Second, it established dominance. The husband's first act as a married man was to assert physical control in front of his peers. That moment defined the marriage. Third, it bonded the men. Shared witnessing created complicity. They had seen her submission. They had participated in her breaking. They were now invested in the system. This was not intimacy. It was systematic control. And the evidence is unmistakable. The Digest of Justinian, a compilation of Roman legal texts, includes references to consummation verification. In annulment cases, witnesses were legally permitted to testify about whether consummation had occurred. Ask yourself a simple question. How would they know? Because they were there. The marriage of Julia Secunda, 121 AD. They were there not as friends, but as political guarantors. The marriage was a contract between powerful families, and its consummation was a clause to be ratified in person. Julia was a child, draped in the sheer tunica recta of a bride, her hair ceremoniously parted with a spearhead, a symbol of the violence she was about to embody. The witnesses did not sit on benches in a small chamber. They reclined on couches in a large, lamplit room, as if at a symposium. Wine was served. The atmosphere was not one of ribaldry, but of sober, official observance. When Quintus led Julia to the bed, there was no curtain, no screen. The act was performed in full view, under the gaze of men who governed provinces and commanded legions. Julia did not cry. According to the later legal testimony, a fragment preserved in a commentary on provincial governance, she was silent and rigid, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. This, the witnesses would later claim, was proof not of trauma, but of prior corruption. Her stillness was read as experience, her silence as defiance. The marriage lasted 6 months. Quintus petitioned for annulment on grounds of non-consummation due to morbus, a defect in the wife. The witnesses, the senators and tribunes, testified unanimously. They stated that Julia had shown neither the modesty of a virgin nor the compliance of a wife. They claimed her body showed no signs of struggle or injury, and therefore she must not have been intact. Julia's father, the senator, counterpetitioned. He argued that the very presence of such a large, politically motivated group had constituted a vis, an act of force, that invalidated their testimony. He claimed his daughter had been terrified into paralysis. The praetor who heard the case dismissed the father's argument. The judgment, recorded in proceedings, was chilling in its clarity. Custom, Mose, dictates a verification of union, especially among those whose lineage must be beyond doubt. The number of witnesses does not invalidate their testimony, but reinforces it. The state has an interest in the legitimacy of its ruling families. The woman's reaction, or lack thereof, is the pertinent evidence. Julia was returned to her father's house, her dowry forfeit. She was not, technically, divorced, but declared nulla nupta, never a bride. Her value in the political marriage market evaporated. Quintus married again within the year, to a girl of 13 from an even wealthier family. The witnesses suffered no social or legal consequence. They had performed a civic duty. The aftermath, a culture of complicity. Julia's case reveals the ultimate function of the ritual. It was a system of peer-reviewed domination. The witnesses were not just observers. They were validators. Their presence transformed an act of private violation into a public, state-sanctioned transfer title. By lending their eyes, they became co-signers on a contract written on a woman's body. This system created profound, societal complicity. Men from all classes, soldiers in a barracks room, senators in a triclinium, were made active participants in the machinery of control. They learned to reframe cruelty as duty, violation as verification, and trauma as evidence of virtue. To question the ritual was to question the very foundations of family, property, and state legitimacy. The trauma inflicted was not a byproduct. It was the mechanism. Fear and pain were the required proofs of transaction. A bride's suffering was the ink that made the contract legal. We know what happened to Rome's laws, its roads, its armies. But we must also ask, what happened to the daughters of Rome? What became of the Julius and the Cornelius? Their names are lost, their lives condensed into legal fragments about blood and testimony. Their silence echoes in the record. They are the missing archive of the empire. Their terror was the mortar between the stones of the eternal city. To understand the height of Roman power, you must also understand the depth of its intimate, institutionalized violence. The empire was not just built on the backs of slaves and the points of swords. It was built in the quiet of bedchambers where children wept, watched by men who called it tradition. This is the hidden ledger of sinister empires. Some stories are not found in the chronicles of emperors, but in the cold formulae of law and the faint, desperate echoes between the lines. Marriage contracts from the 1st and 2nd centuries preserved in papyri from Roman Egypt sometimes included clauses specifying who would verify consummation. Names were written down, roles were assigned, consequences were outlined. One contract dated to 142 after Christ, found in Oxyrhynchus, required 2 witnesses to confirm consummation on the wedding night. Those witnesses had to sign a statement. They did not remain for the entire act. They stayed long enough to verify that it began, long enough to humiliate her, long enough to establish control. We know this because one of the witnesses mentioned it years later in private correspondence. His name was Cornelius Tacitus, possibly the same Tacitus who would become Rome's most famous historian. He expressed discomfort with the practice. He questioned whether it was necessary, but he stayed. He watched. His discomfort did not stop him. It never stopped any of them. Julia Secunda remained in that marriage for 12 years. She gave birth to 4 children. She fulfilled her duty to the state. Then she died, giving birth to the 5th. She was 26 years old. Nearly half her life had been spent pregnant or recovering from childbirth. Her wedding night had been witnessed by some of the most powerful men in Rome. Her pain produced citizens. That was all that mattered. The correspondence mentioning her survives in the Vatican Library archives. Fragmentary, damaged, but real. Julia existed. Her trauma was real, and Rome considered it proper. Here is what haunts me most about Roman marriage. The system did not hide itself. The laws were public. The customs were celebrated. The poets wrote about it openly, and they were proud. Romans believed this proved their virtue, their strength, their order. The ability to systematically violate women was not seen as cruelty. It was seen as civilization. That is the true danger of institutionalized violence. Once it is systematized, it becomes invisible. People stop questioning it. It turns into tradition, and tradition becomes sacred. Rome ran this machine for centuries. Over 1,000 years, if you include the Byzantine continuation. Millions of women passed through it. Millions of wedding nights. Millions of witnesses. How many Cornelius? How many Julius? The records rarely name them. They record the men, the contracts, the legal disputes. Women appear only as footnotes. Their suffering becomes background context. Their trauma matters only when it creates a legal inconvenience. We do not have their voices. What we have are descriptions of their pain, written by the men who caused it. That is what survived. But sometimes, rarely, a woman's voice breaks through the silence. Near Hadrian's Wall, in the Vindolanda tablets, there's a letter from the 2nd century after Christ. A woman named Claudia Severa writes to her friend Sulpicia Lepidina. She mentions her wedding day. She does not describe what happened. She does not need to. She writes, "I cannot speak of it, even now. You will understand when your time comes. Prepare your heart. Not prepare yourself. Prepare your heart. Prepare for breaking." That is all she could say. That is all she was allowed to say. And yet it tells you everything. There is another fragment from Roman Egypt, dated to the 3rd century after Christ. A marriage contract preserved by chance in dry sand. In the bride section, there's a line written in a different hand, possibly hers. "I agree to all that is required, though I wish it were otherwise." 5 words buried inside legal language. An entire life of suffering compressed into a single sentence. She agreed, but she wished it were otherwise. That is as close to refusal as she could get. These fragments survived by accident, preserved in sand, preserved in military archives at the edges of empire. Most women's words are gone, lost, erased, never recorded. But these whispers remain, and they tell us. The women knew. They understood what was being done to them. They simply had no power to stop it. Here's a question that should keep you awake tonight. Rome is often called the foundation of Western civilization. Roman law, Roman government, Roman culture. We study it in schools. We admire its engineering. We analyze its literature. We call it sophisticated. But this was Rome, too. This systematic violation was not a flaw in the system. It was part of its sophistication. The trauma machine was built directly into Roman law. So when we celebrate Rome, what exactly are we celebrating? What does the civilized really mean? The aqueducts were built by slaves. The roads were maintained by conquered peoples. The empire expanded through genocide, and the families who ruled it were founded on wedding nights like Julia's, like Cornelia's, like countless unnamed girls whose suffering sustained the system. This is not distant ancient history. This is a foundation we are still standing on. Roman law shaped medieval law. Medieval law shaped modern law. Marriage customs changed. Rituals softened, but the underlying structure remained. Women as property, men as owners. In some places, it still remains. The witnesses eventually stopped standing in the room. Explicit verification faded, but the assumption never fully disappeared. The idea that women's bodies belonged to systems of power did not vanish. It just became quieter, more subtle, more deniable. The blueprint survived, and the pattern remains. Until we confront where it began, we cannot dismantle where it leads. That is why this history matters. Not because Rome is shocking, but because Rome is foundational. The violence was not an aberration. It was a structure, and the structure is still with us. This is a work of sinister empires, to expose the architectures of power hidden in plain sight. If this revealed something you'd never fully considered, follow our work. We will keep uncovering the histories they tried to bury. Leave your thoughts below. We read every one. Until the next investigation.